This is Ayani.
And this is Corinne.
And you're listening to Sex, Love, Literature, a pop culture podcast where we take a semi-scholarly look at why
and how
the sex stuff in media matters.
This episode is the second of our two-parter on Bridgerton, Jane Austen, and the appeal of the Regency romance genre.
Continuing our tete-a-tete with Mav and Hannah from Vox Popcast, we get into why Netflix's Persuasion may or may not have sucked, other delightful Jane Austen adaptations, and what ingredients we absolutely have to make a Regency romance work.
If you like what you hear, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Leaving us good reviews really helps with discoverability. And it gives us a sweet, sweet hit of that good old dopamine.
All right, on with the show. I guess transitioning from bosoms, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thinking about the sort of, leap from your 2005 Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen, to Bridgerton, there are a lot of changes, but one of the obvious ones is there's like a lot of sex.
Bosoms!
So how does that then affect, obviously, or I don't know, maybe obviously, maybe not obviously, Bridgerton is a Regency romance, but it is a much more, it is a fantasy of what that would be. But so are the ways we think about Jane Austen. I don't know.
I was going to ask, do you all think it's a Regency romance? Would you put it in the same category as like Jane Austen? ?
I definitely think there's a through line there. I think it's really important that people understand that people had sex in the Regency period all the time, and
nope.
like Jane,
cloning. I thought that
not like Jane Austen's stories are like there's sex in Jane Austen stories. Like Lydia runs away with Wickham. Like there's a major subplot in Sense and Sensibility where the character played by Alan Rickman, Colonel Brandon, like he's like in love with a girl who like gets ruined, and like then her daughter also gets ruined, and like there are theories that I've heard both by scholars and fans that Marianne Dashwood actually does have sex with Willoughby, and when she gets sick in part of the novel, she's miscarrying. Like that's one way you could read that.
Oh
yeah.
I love sharing this theory because it blew my mind when I first heard it. And so like I think there's like there's definitely like room, like just because it's not like on the page, because circulating libraries and you wanted to make money and all sorts of things. Just because it's not on the page doesn't mean it's not there, or like the threat of it isn't there.
Oh, for sure.
So part of what my research in this is, I've read a lot of Christian Regency romance novels.
I've read a handful of those.
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of skipped the sermony bits. I'm sorry, not really, but like the readers of those novels, I know because I read the Amazon reviews alongside reading the novels. The readers of those novels have a particular fantasy of what the Regency period was, and it is somewhat sexless. And even if the author uses the term making love, which is not equivalent to sex all the time, they get upset about it. Like the implication of sexual like desire in many cases like will upset some of these readers. So like
interesting.
So that's a very long-winded way of saying like that like sex is actually, I think, built into like the Regency genre in one way or another. And like there are definitely choices by like what authors in both the past and the present like want to put on the page or the screen. But I don't think like sex actually discounts something as a Regency romance.
So I don't think it discounts it, right? But if I'm thinking about like Sense and Sensibility or Pride and Prejudice, right? Compared to, let's just say, the first season of Bridgerton, because the first season had a lot more good sexy bits to it. I feel like season 2 could have had more sex, actually.
Not enough hot dude, yes.
Yeah.
Or none.
I have my opinions, but I'll save them.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I want to hear your opinions, and I'm also team hot boxer man
Oh
Will.
God, yeah.
So when he
Yeah.
came back for the season, I was like, oh, you're back. I love you. But my feelings for the hot boxer aside, the adaptation choices when we think about like Sense and Sensibility or Pride and Prejudice, and also this might be a time period difference too, right? So maybe we can think about this when we come back to Persuasion, but like even if the sex you can read it in between the lines on the page, it is not beyond Lydia being ruined, right? We figured the ruining is the sexening that is happening, but it's not on the screen. We don't get to see it. It's just in everyone's shame. So I feel like there's this distinct like decision when you show sex in kind of a visual medium.
Yeah.
So that's something that I find curious and interesting and enjoyable. Like I don't think adding the sex makes it less of a Regency romance, but I do think it makes it a different kind of fantasy.
Oh, totally.
If that makes sense.
I have a question about, and it's sort of because I haven't read enough of them, right? I've read the ones that we've mentioned, basically, but I've seen stuff, and I have a general understanding, and I learned terms earlier today when I read yesterday when I read the Wikipedia page, and they distinguished between, and I don't know how much this is done scholarly, but the historical Regency romance and the traditional Regency romance, the traditional Regency romance and Regency historical romance were the two terms that they used. And their rationalization was I know it took me a while to figure out. I'm like, those sound exactly the same, but they were talking about whether or not you had books that were trying to copy either the Austen style or the Georgette Heyer style of doing the, largely a asexual or at least sexless on the page, trying to hit the actual beats of trying to be what Regency romances traditionally were, novels of manners, trying to do that. Or you had people who they use Juliet Quinn. They are, they're talking Bridgerton, where you're trying to mix modern sensibilities, as they said, into the time period, which is what they called the historical version. And I wonder if that only works. And again, I don't know enough about the study. I don't know enough about the academic side. I know if I were doing this with comics, there would be a lot of people complaining, well, there didn't used to be sex in comics. There didn't used to be this in comics. There didn't used to be that. And it's like, yes, there was. You just didn't know how to do this. Same thing happens when they look at television from the 1950s. Like I've done a lot of work with like 1950s era television and movies where there's lots of sex. You just have to know what the social cues are because they just couldn't show things. So like, is that the case? Is it like when Hannah's talking about like, Lydia being ruined, right? Or when you talk about, I can't remember the character's name you said who might have miscarried. Like, is part of the fantasy that, there's something romantic about a simpler time when just a touch of the hand could be enough of a thing to yearn for 6 months, as opposed to we need to do it now, which is like, what the thrill of Bridgerton part of it was, that it was so naughty. I thought I think I enjoyed that, but I think it's only there through comparison, right? Like the Bridgerton plot probably isn't as interesting if it happens in 1985. Like I think it might have been, but I think a lot of people wouldn't have watched it. People would have been like, whatever, if it was the same story. So I don't know.
Well, to go back to this distinction you're making, and to pick up on one thing you said, like the dislike of like maybe the traditionalist like Regency romance with things like that are more like modern sensibilities like Bridgerton. I'm not an expert in Regency romance beyond like actual 19th century novels, even though I talk about them because it's like the present like adaptations of the thing I studied. But I have noticed, and other people have noticed, that like there are problems within the Regency Austen fandom, and I'm deeply skeptical of anyone who's like Bridgerton should have taken like more of a page out of Georgette Heyer's like notebook, and like it's not historically accurate because it feels sometimes like many of the times, like the people who are saying these things are coding what there's like their racism.
There were no black people.
Specifically.
Yes. Black people were not invented till 1954. Everybody knows
depending
that.
on like you know that they're coding like their racism maybe depending on like the adaptation. Although this I would not talk about with Bridgerton really, since it has a problem like their homophobia. Like they're using historical accuracy as a way to be like, why are there people of color who are like in the show? Which, by the way, I've said, I think on every Bridgerton show we've done on Vox Podcast, and we've done 3, there were people of color not only in Britain, but circulating in the marriage mart and part of like the like upper class. Like, it was complicated. Racism existed. It was like the fantasy of Bridgerton is complicated. We've discussed this in detail
as
on those shows. But the point is that there were people there. Like, this is not historically inaccurate. Like, do your research. I beg you. Like, some just quick historical examples are: one, there's the novel published in 1808, The Woman of Color, which is about a biracial woman who like travels from Jamaica to England, and like her experiences trying to like meet the terms of her father's will. It's really good. Like it really like will put any other like 19th century novel you've read into a different perspective. It's really good. It's written by anonymous. We're not sure who wrote it. 2, Dido Elizabeth Belle, which they made a fairly recent movie adaptation of her life. It's pretty historically inaccurate, but they do try and make it more of like a Regency style romance and focus more on like the romance of her life. Also, like Tom Felton's in it for like 10 seconds as like a racist douchebag. Fun fact. So like there are examples, and there are stories that people have been recovering and telling for a while. So, you know, please stop saying that Bridgerton's historically inaccurate is what I'm saying, because you're wrong, and you're making the Regency fandom unsafe for other people.
So another distinction I would also make that I don't know is always made is that, like, even when we think, if we group Jane Austen and Georgia Hare together, Jane Austen was writing contemporary fiction basically when she was writing, and Georgia Hare stuff is very much not writing about when she lived, writing about the past. So like her stuff is very, very like meticulously researched and includes a lot of like historical details that you don't have in the same way in Jane Austen, because she doesn't need to explain to you about, I don't know, the fire poker or the carrot or whatever like piece of like historical fun fact is part of it. Like, I took a class on Downton Abbey in context with Karen Westman, and we started with Pride and Prejudice, but then we read some Georgia Hare, and just like the level of detail when you're writing about a time that is not your own, because you have to explain the quote unquote history as part of the scene setting, makes them very different experiences to read. And but even then, like with, for example, like the racism inherent in a lot of Georgia Hare's work, like, because that it can be used as a sort of defense for racism to be like, but I did the research. It's like, but you did some research, but to tell a particular kind of story that you wanted to tell.
And you still did the racism, even though you did the research. Like, it doesn't make it go away.
well, and I guess that's kind of, that's the comparative thing that I was getting at, right? Like, Jane Austen would not have mentioned complete mundane things. Like, okay, also, no one ever goes to the bathroom in Sense and Sensibility. Because why would they? Like, it's just a thing that she assumes would have happened, right? Right? Like, I mean, it's not, that's not part of the story. Like, there's stuff that she doesn't mention because that doesn't mean it's not there. So I guess what I wonder is, like, you know, if you're doing a story, okay, in a modern story, there are lots of movies about couples who you never see have sex, because this is a movie about them raising their kids, or this is a movie about going to work or whatever. You assume that sex might happen, but it's just not part of the story. And if it's not part of her story, that doesn't mean it can't be. But I think because our our picture of Regency period Britain right now, for most of us, probably has more to do with Pride and Prejudice than it does to do with, eighth grade history books. Like,
Mm.
and I think that's true of a.
You learned about the Regency in 8th grade?
No, that's exactly my point, right? I didn't, right? Like I probably should have, or 12th grade, or same thing as, okay, like the American conception of what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma is entirely based on the Watchmen TV show. Like that's where most people learned about it. And I think that maybe that's what happens with other stuff, right? Like, so if people's idea of what was 1800s Britain like, I don't know, everybody looked like Keira Knightley. That's like how I see it, right? Because what else am I going to do? And I wonder if that happens. Like people probably think that if you go to the 1500s, everyone spoke like Shakespeare. They didn't. Like that, like he made that language up. That's like like that's. So I wonder if there's some of that. So when you deviate from it to do something like Julia Quinn's Bridgerton, where you have people who are explicitly having sex, maybe it seems like you're deviating from, people's weird idealized version of what they viewed that time period as, because sometimes it's just like they're not picking up on the social cues. Like I run into people every day. I have this fight all the time of people who are saying, well, but comic books didn't used to be political back in the old days. And I go, Captain America punched Hitler in his first appearance ever, right? Like you're wrong. Like, trust me, you're wrong. I know this for a fact. But like, just because you don't know how to pick up on the cues of what the political stuff was from a story from 1965, that doesn't mean it wasn't there. So maybe we just don't know how to pick up on the cues of something that Jane Austen wrote in 1815. Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Or that I don't know when Heyer was writing in 1920, 1930, whatever it is, right?
I mean, I think that's an excellent point, and a train is rumbling by me, so I'm hoping it's not going to get picked up in the audio. Awesome. One of the fun parts of living next to train tracks. But I think that kind of leads me to, like, almost directly related to your point, Mav, is a question of adaptation, right? And of choices. Because one of the things that we've been thinking about is kind of adaptations, and I think you mentioned one, Hannah, but adaptations of Jane Austen's work that are pulled out of the Regency period, right? And it's kind of taking her tales and adapting them for a new time, a new cast, etc. And then how that then perhaps changes the fantasy of a Regency romance, because I don't think we then include those adaptations under the umbrella of a Regency romance. So not like Pride and Prejudice 2005, right? But like Fire Island, for example, which you all talked about on a recent episode, and that I enjoyed a lot, which is like it's direct adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, right? But it's not a Regency romance. It's something different. So how, like, where do we put these kind of stories? And I think, Corinne, in the notes, you put the Lizzie Bennett Diaries as well.
I was going to mention that.
You want to give a little context for what that is? Because I don't 100% remember.
So the Lizzie Bennett Diaries was it was a series on YouTube where it basically sets up Lizzie as a grad student who's doing a vlog. And it was produced, I think, in part by Hank Green of the Vlog Brothers. And it was absolutely like a runaway hit, much more than they expected to be. But again, very much a product of its time, like Lydia's scandal, rather than eloping or not quite eloping with Wickham, is that he makes like a sex tape with her that he's going to release without her consent. So it's, again, hitting some of the same story beats, but putting them in a different context.
And can I?
So yeah, how?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you go, Hannah. Oh. You go. It's your turn.
Oh, I was going to say, and can I just say, I really appreciate about Fire Island and the Lizzie Bennett Diaries that Lydia's story does not follow the unhappy ending of the novel. Because, the weird thing about the novel, and unfortunately I don't have it right in front of me to quote it, is that, Elizabeth is not yes, she's married to Wickham, great, happy ending. She's like, no, this is really, really bad. But, this is, what saves her from, total ruin, and us too. There's complicated feelings about, because of how society was. But the, contemporary adaptations like Lizzie Bennett Diaries and Fire Island have been no, we're not doing this. We're not punishing this character. which I'm glad about, because like a lot of the discourse that I even heard in like some of my literature classes whenever I like discuss Pride and Prejudice, because that was fairly common because it's Pride and Prejudice, was, oh yes, well, Lydia is super annoying and she deserves this, and I'm like, she's 15, like she's 15, 16, like she's who among us is not
been a horny
super annoying? Yeah, like also like well, I mean, horny, yes, but also like super annoying, like the people like they want to like blame her. And Wickham, is a serial predator. Like, so like the way the adaptations like shift their focus and like really are like, no.
She's a horny
bad.
15-year-old, and you're largely seeing her through her sister's eyes, right? Like there's going to be some rivalry there as well. It's not like it's like we don't know what she's really like. We know how Lizzie sees her, like, or Elizabeth.
And like, I mean, I'm not implying that Austen doesn't know that Wickham's a predator. She clearly does. But like the adaptations, put more emphasis in that way. Like they what's super interesting is how these adaptations to me like talk back to the novel and highlight things that like weren't there, are there, but like weren't like super prominent in my mind until I saw the adaptation. Like Pride and Prejudice, like I was like, oh, after seeing this, let me reread this novel and think about like all the colonial implications that like hide in the background in Austen.
And by Pride and Prejudice, you mean the Bollywood film,
right? Same director as Bennett Like Beckham. Highly recommend. One of the most interesting adaptations I've seen of Pride and Prejudice.
So something that this is making me think about is how when we take Jane Austen and put it in a different time period and a different context, we obviously can see the commentary it's making both on the moment in which it is being produced and on Jane Austen proper. But I think that layer of remove makes the commentary more obvious than something like Bridgerton, which, we can discuss how effective its commentary was, but instead of seeing it as commentary, people just are like, well, it's inaccurate. Because there's this just sort of like, of this sort of like holification of like what Regency romance, like proper, quote unquote, should be or should look like.
So if you don't do that though, right? Like, here's what I'm wondering. Because like, again, I loved Bridgerton, and I also loved the thing that I'm about to say, Romeo plus Juliet, right? Which is not the same time period, but like if you look at Romeo plus Juliet, which is the original text of Romeo and Juliet, but they're wearing Hawaiian shirts and they've got guns instead of swords. They call them swords, and and I love that movie. What? Oh,
I said, and sparkles. There's also sparkles.
Oh yeah. And I love Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet. I think it's brilliant. But every time I've taught it in classes where I have some students who are totally into it, who are like, oh my God, I remember this movie from, watching this old movie from when I was a little kid. I'm like, I hate you. But, but they think of this as like this classic movie, and usually girls are like, it's so romantic. It's so wonderful. Leo's dreamy, that kind of thing. And then I have a lot of people who are like, this is stupid. Why are we watching this? This is awful. Why are they ruining the original Romeo and Juliet? And I'm like, what do you mean the original Romeo and Juliet? And then I make them read the tragical history of Romeus and Juliet, and Juliet, which is what William Shakespeare adapted his version of Romeo and Juliet from, because he stole it. And I make them read the original, and they're like, this is very different. I'm like, I know, because now you can apologize to Baz Luhrmann. But the point being, like, it was the thing that makes that weird is because it's like this weird half step, right? Like everybody would be okay if they spoke, if they were in what they imagined 1500s clothing looking like most versions of Romeo and Juliet. And everyone's okay if you completely, move it up to be West Side Story, same story, but an adaptation. And it's like, oh, this is very different. It gets weird when you start doing this weird half adaptation, right? My favorite thing about Bridgerton is when they listen to Ariana Grande music. I'm like, yes, this is amazing, right? So I like that, but I understand why some people get taken out of it by that. And if is it that like people can't accept when, you know, when either you have to completely throw it away and start from scratch, or you know, like a West Side Story does, or you have to be faithful to this platonic ideal that didn't exist, right? And people get weirded out when you do something innovative and original and like, you know, quirky. Like I like quirky, but maybe people just can't handle that.
So I wonder if this is maybe a good moment to talk about Netflix's Persuasion, because my take on it, at least, is that it was terrible, but not necessarily because it. Because I think the problem is they tried to be quote unquote quirky, but without
Bridgerton.
any sort of unifying vision.
They tried to be Bridgerton.
In a way that, like,
they tried to be Bridgerton. That's it.
They tried to be Bridgerton. They also, another critique I've heard is they tried to be Fleabag with like breaking the fourth wall stuff, but they didn't have a reason that they were doing any of those things, and didn't think about how it all worked as a whole. So the quirkiness to be quirky, I don't have a problem with quirkiness if like it has some sort of, I don't know, some sort of reason to be there.
Plan?
Yeah. But like Persuasion just like did not work for me, both because it was not at all like the original Persuasion. Like I am not normally like an adaptation like purist. Like I don't care. Like I'm not into fidelity criticism. That's like not my bag. But it just was so unlike Persuasion, but also didn't know what it wanted to be instead. So it just like did not work for me at all.
Well, Mary was delightful though.
I'll back. Oh, okay. Because I was going to back you up a little bit.
I liked the bunny.
He said that.
Oh yeah, the bunny is good.
The bunny's good.
I liked the bunny. That was a great like addition to the original novel. But yeah, you're totally right. Like I don't want to be that person that's like I wrote.
Oh, you can be that person. This is semi-academic,
so my opinion counts. But but like I think that like they tried to combine, and I think other people have probably said this too, like I think they tried to combine like Anne's voice with like the observations made by Austen the narrator, and also like I watched the trailer and my first thought was they're trying to make Anne Elliot Elizabeth Bennet. Not every Austen heroine is Elizabeth Bennet. And honestly, the biggest failure for me was actually not, I couldn't watch parts of it actually. I had to fast forward, but that's not critique of like the movie. That's just me not being able to do cringe humor, like awkward moments where like she drinks too much at a dinner party and reveals that like she was like her brother-in-law originally proposed to her.
Yeah, I had like a verbal reaction to that. Most of it like I kept inside, but for that one I was just like so upset because Anne would not fucking do that.
Like Anne wouldn't do that, but I wasn't like I honestly like I'm not even mad about it. I was just like I can't watch this because it's I'm getting secondhand embarrassment. Like I already think too hard about all the things I've said across the course of the day and like what I would change. I can't do this for like an adaptation of a character. Like this, like fast forward. So like I fast forward through like the first like I don't know 25 minutes. But the failure for me is that they didn't, and you know what? Actually, I don't like Wentworth in the book really either, because he's a naval captain and he got all his money through like prize money. But also, I realize I'm being selectively judgy because like all the Austen heroes like were involved in like the military or the church or like are super wealthy landowners. And where did they get their stuff? Which is like my like this is like the question I've been asking myself and therefore the world because Mav like keeps putting me on the air every week. Anytime we talk about Regency romance, I'm like, what are all the things structurally that are bad that allow the fantasy of the romance to happen? So what are we really cheering for in the end to make this possible? Anyway, the actor was super bland as Wentworth and did not make me forget about him being a naval captain so I could be judgy about the Napoleonic War all I wanted. And I'm like, why do they want to end up together? Like, and they also like softened the character of Mr. Elliot, like Mr. Elliot's like supposed to be a slimy villain, and honestly, I was kind of like, yeah.
Oh yeah,
you have that also, yeah. Like in the novel, he's a slimy villain. Like in the there's like a whole subplot they cut out where they cut out the main disabled character named Mrs. Smith, who like Mr. Elliot in the novel, like, leads her husband into ruin before he dies, and then, like,
Oh.
Mrs. Smith is a widow, and Mr. Elliot refuses to help her, and
Oh.
but also, like, it's important you know that the help she wants is recovering her property in the West Indies. So, they just, like, deleted, like, all the, like, colonialism and, like, the disability narrative, and made Mr. Elliot just kind of more like a kind of honest cad who's, like, super attractive.
Yes,
And,
that's
like,
why I want to be in the game.
and, like, and actually he was more like a Henry Crawford from, like, Mansfield Park for any Austen people, where he, like, his biggest flaw is, like, he can't keep it in his pants, but he really, like, is attracted to the heroine. Austen, I'm sure, would appreciate that definition. I actually think that she would. She actually has a lot of, like, sexual innuendo in, like, Mansfield Park. It's very funny. Mary Crawford is amazing. Anyway, they like, so they tone Mr. Elliot down. So, like, they cut out a lot of, like, I think maybe perhaps the more, like, they like cut the things that maybe would have been more difficult to, like, adapt. Like Emma 2020 just kind of hand waves away Harriet's, like, encounter with, like, the travelers. Like Frank Churchill just, like, shouts, like, she's been accosted, and, like, carries her, like, dramatically through and interrupts in the moment between, like, Knightley and Emma, but there's, like, really no discussion or, like, critique of it. It's just, like, a moment to, like, make Emma think that Frank Churchill and Harriet might be interested in each other. That's all to say, Persuasion just was like, nope, not gonna deal with this. just gonna paste all over it. Just gonna forget about it. Gonna like, cast the strong male actor as the villain, so Hannah's gonna cheer for him now, apparently, despite critiquing him super hard in that academic article she wrote. Honestly, I didn't hate it. That's a long review of.
Sure?
Honestly, I didn't hate it.
Are you sure that's not what it sounded like to me?
I mean, it's not good, but, like, honestly, if you liked it, I'm not mad at you. I mean, I know no one on this call did, but, like, if you're mad, like, if you liked it, I'm not mad. And it wasn't like Persuasion the novel. Like, you're right, like, it's not recognizable, but I wasn't mad. Like there are reviews that are like, anyone involved in this should go to prison, and I think that, like, somebody needs to calm down.
Yeah. So Mav, you wanted to say
so Hannah and I talked about this offline before we came on, where, like, I went and read a bunch of the reviews after I watched it. Just context, I've never read the book Persuasion, and I've never seen any other version of it. So this is literally the only thing I know about this story. I mean, I know about the story in that I know that Jane Austen wrote it. I know I'd heard of it before, but I've never read it. I've never seen any other adaptation. So this was my entry into it. And before I saw it, I was primed for, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch this really bad movie because people are ravaging it and it's going to be awful. But I knew I wasn't going to be Corinne because I have nothing to compare it to, right? Like, it's not like I'm going to be like, oh, this is an adaptation and they ruined Anne's character. I don't know what she's like. I have no idea. So I'm like, okay, I'll go in. And I found it boring, like, and pointless, but not like it really felt to me like either this is a really boring novel, except for I know it can't be because there's too many, like, I know too many people who are fans of it. So I assume it's just a poor adaptation. It really feels like Netflix said, hey, we want some of that sweet, sweet Bridgerton money. Not Netflix, rather Hulu.
No, it is.
Yeah,
Netflix.
it was Netflix.
Okay.
It was Netflix.
Well, it felt like they wanted to do. It felt like they wanted more Bridgerton stuff, and this was IP that was available, so they were just like, let's just see what happens. Dakota Johnson, people like her from that smutty movie, but we don't want to pay her enough to take her clothes off, and she'll do weird, quirky things, and it's like, oh, she's talking to the fourth wall. Yeah, Fleabag's popular right now. Moonlighting was once. Like, none of it, I didn't understand any of it, but it wasn't like, I mean, she's a really good actress, so I'm like, oh, she's as charming as she ever is, I guess. Like, but like, she didn't even seem like a character. She seemed like the person, Dakota Johnson, that I've seen talking to Jimmy Fallon before. Like, she was just being herself and saying dialogue. And I'm like, it's not bad. I just don't care about anybody. And like, I have to, I have the cast list up as you guys are talking, because otherwise I'll forget who is who, because like it left that little impression on me. But it wasn't awful. Like I was also like, I don't know if people like this because they like Dakota Johnson. That's fine, I guess. But like, it wasn't super sexy. I didn't find her like cleverly feminist out of place for, you know, the era that she's supposed to be in. I felt like, oh, she's just kind of doing a thing and it's fine, I guess. The things that I didn't like were just like, there were people who are less famous than her who I felt were trying really hard for this movie, and the movie was not worth the performance that some of the supporting actors were putting in. People were like trying real this. There were who's her annoying sister?
Mary.
Both of them,
the married one.
Yes.
Okay. The actress playing her wanted this role so bad, it seemed like, and I'm just like, this is beneath you, honey. Please don't strain.
She was hilarious.
Yeah, she was great.
She was the best part of the film for
me.
Like
I felt like she was like, I don't know who she is. Her name is Mia McKenna Bruce, and I felt like the role was beneath her, and you know, good for you that you're working so hard, but like, don't strain yourself. That's how I felt the entire movie, and I'm just like, oh, you know, this is fine, I guess. Like, but why are you trying so hard? And I felt that a lot. So I was just like, I don't know. I didn't hate it. I'm like Hannah. It's like, it was fine. I mean, I had it. You know, I had it on every once in a while. I play a game on my phone. I had to like do some editing on an article. It's like it wasn't offensive the way. So I thought some people were overreacting because it wasn't the book that they loved, but it just wasn't good. It wasn't bad. It was. I'll forget I watched it next week.
In some ways, it disappointed me because like I was expecting something based on the reviews that was like so hilariously bad, like Twilight, like an unintentional like bad comedy like Twilight, but it's like just sort of a middle ground that's like, it's just fine. Like if it weren't called Persuasion, I think a lot more people would have just watched it, enjoyed it, forgotten about it, moved on with their lives. Like you know, like the Netflix Christmas movies that
I love
aren't not the good ones, not like A Night Before Christmas, but like Christmas Calendar. No one can recall what happens in Christmas Calendar. Because Christmas Calendar is the worst one.
There's a magic advent calendar, maybe?
Maybe.
Oh, no, I thought it was the one where they got together on Christmas and then it goes through all their holidays.
Oh,
that might be a different one.
Nope, I don't.
Oh. No, I take it back. The Christmas Calendar is not the worst one. I don't even remember the title of the worst one. It's this poor girl who's nice, whose father punishes her by sending her to a hometown because she's clumsy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that the one that had the actress from the 100?
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to apologize to the Christmas Calendar. That's not what we're talking about right now.
Corinne, you look like you had something to say before we got off.
Okay. So bringing it back. So I guess then some of the sort of critiques then we could make of Persuasion. There is the adaptation failure critique, which I think you can have an adaptation Persuasion that's not recognizable as Persuasion that could potentially still be successful as long as it's doing something. But the other things then that like Hannah's mentioned and that I'm now going to critique is that like it lacked both colonial context and sort of critique of colonialism that at least Bridgerton is trying to make, and that like more contemporary stuff like some of Courtney Milan's stuff is doing in a more conscious kind of way. But also I think for me, Persuasion failed as a love story or as a romance because there was no yearning. I did not buy it. There was like no chemistry going on. So like none.
They did not look like they wanted to kiss at all.
Yeah. It was like, but why did you turn down your brother-in-law though? Because he's super charming and has a nice smile, and the guy you're supposedly in love with does not smile at you at all.
Yeah. So then it also didn't really have the sort of, at least what we think of as the sort of rigid rule structure of Regency romance either. So it just basically had the costumes and the name Persuasion.
I mean, and the hot bad guy who wasn't that bad, just horny.
What?
Also, like, Henry Golding is so much more hot in other contexts than he was in Persuasion. They, like, did him very dirty, but that's not the point.
Was he a bad guy?
No.
He's supposed to be. He's like the villain of the novel.
Yeah, I can't unsee
but
him.
He's just a charming cat.
Yeah.
He's not even that cattish. I mean, I guess. I mean, all things considered, kisses somebody.
So I guess they also removed the villain from the narrative.
Yeah. I guess, like, and also, like, they made, kind of like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, they kind of made the hero the villain. Because, like, the thing about Wentworth in the books that you have to give him credit for, even if you're me and you don't like him, is that he's, like, extremely kind.
Yeah,
and, like, actually, like, and actually, like, cares about Anne. And, like, people, like that scene in the woods when, like, she's playing with the kids in the movie, and he's like, I'm super mad at you for, like, putting the kids in danger, grr. Like, in the book, it's like, the kids are being too rough with her, no one else cares, and he's like, let me step in. And so it's like, do you even care about her? Are you good? Do you have any, like, defining traits that make me want to root for you?
So we've established here a lot of reasons why either Persuasion is fine or that it fails, depending on your interpretation. And also some of the things that work for us in Pride and Prejudice, in various adaptations, and in Bridgerton. So if we were to come up with what, for us, the 4 people on this podcast episode would consider a successful Regency romance, what would those be? Like, what are the 2 things that for you a Regency romance has to have for you to want to watch it?
Personally.
Yes, you personally.
Okay.
Well, I know one for me is I have to believe in the romance. I have to have investment in the 2 main people getting together. If I'm more interested in the main person perhaps getting with the hot rake, then you haven't, like, I need to be interested in it, but I need to still be rooting for, like, the main couple. And if I'm not doing that in a Regency romance, that doesn't feel right. Like, I don't think I would be as into a real, yeah. Because there are other love triangles and love squares and other things where I can, like, root for multiple sides of the shape. But I think in a Regency romance, I need to really, even if I'm interested in what's happening over here with hot man number B, I need to really be pulling for the main couple to find their quote unquote happiness at the end.
I'm not sure I need to be pulling for them to have the happiness. I'm halfway there. I need to at least be pulling for them to be interested in each other. So, like, again, I love Bridgerton, right? I love both seasons of Bridgerton. What made the first season work is that I really, really wanted them to end up together. Like, I wanted Daphne and the Hot Duke to end up together. The second season, I knew they were going to end up together because I know the rules, but watching it, I was invested in their romance. But if it had not worked out, I would have been like, tragic, but okay, I understand. You know, so like I don't need there to be a happy ending. Even I know that's the rule, fair, but I don't need it. My problem with Persuasion was very much that, like, I was like, I don't care if you never kiss. I don't I will say the movie poster that they made for it is so much hotter than anything that happens in the entire movie. And that was a problem. It like, I was like, because I'm like, I don't see any chemistry from you whatsoever. I don't know why anybody likes each other. Oh, you know, we've been yearning for each other for years. We broke up for some reason before that I'm unclear of, because I couldn't be bothered to rewind and see what she said. And that's like, if she explained it, and that's a failing of it. So I don't need there to be, for me to watch it personally, I don't need there to be clever, like, heady, doing something interesting. Like, that's the bonus of Bridgerton. What I love about Bridgerton is that I feel like it's doing something academically. It's doing cool commentary. They would have had me if they could have just gotten me with, you know, let's watch Dakota Johnson in a pretty costume make out with some hot dude. Like, that would have been enough if I felt like they wanted to, in a way that this felt more boring than anything that she's done in 50 Shades of Grey. And I don't think she has the best chemistry with him either. So that was a problem for me.
Yeah. And just to clarify, I don't mean that there has to be a happy ending, but I'm rooting for it.
Yeah.
Like, even if I'm like, oh, darn, tragic, like you said, like, the whole time I'm still like, I want your joy. I want you to love each other, which is just like, yeah.
And here I'm like, I don't, like, if you never see each other again, all right. You know, like I don't care.
So far we have investment in the relationship, and Mav also mentioned pretty costumes, which I think
pretty
are also
people.
important for
Like I mean,
pretty people,
pretty something.
pretty costumes.
I'm watching. I mean, I have this whole theory where movies are spectacle, right? Like I'm not just reading the book. Like if you ask me if I want to read the book Persuasion, that's different. I'm looking for something different. But if I'm going to spend 90 to 120 minutes sitting in front of my TV screen, show me something. Like it's not radio, it's TV. Show me pretty people. That's what I'm here for, because and pretty might mean different things, right? Like I'm not even saying it has to be a very specific aesthetic. Just I'm looking at you do something to, you know, gain my eyeballs so that I'm not playing Tetris on my phone.
Gain my eyeballs.
Yeah. I mean, like I got bored and looked away and like did other stuff, and that's not the mark of good television.
No. Mm-mm.
I'm going to think about gain my eyeballs all of October when it's Halloween season. And anyway, that's not relevant to this. This is what happens when we record. You can edit this out. This is what happens when we record at like 9 p.m. our time. I start to go even more chaotic than usual. Well, I will be contrarian, Mav, and say that actually I do need like the commentary. Austen had commentary in her novels, and if you're not doing it now, especially like when it's, you know, a reflection on another period and like thinking about it with our current moment, then it just feels like why are you even writing this? I realize that the PhD brain has probably ruined me for me to have this opinion, but like Courtney Milan, you know, writes like happily ever afters and still has written, I think, some of the smartest novels I've ever read in thinking about like the role of like the 19th century romance, not just exclusively like Regency if we're being strict with the time period, which we haven't, but I hear the little scholarly like voices in my head being like the Regency period is the stuff. Anyway, but she's like written some of the smartest books I've ever read. I actually think The Duke Who Didn't is a wonderful compliment to Persuasion in thinking about nationhood and like what makes up the nation and like the colonial legacy of like the 19th century romance. And I think that she is like thinking with and against Austen, like in many of the books she's read, but not read, written, but also I'm sure she's thinking about that as she like reads and recommends novels as well. But like Emma, the 2020 version, like I think what that really added in that adaptation, because you know there's so many adaptations of Austen and especially like Emma and Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, that like what that Emma added was like really exposing like the class elements and like how harmful those class elements are and how Emma thinks, how Knightley thinks, and just really like in the tone of the novel, not the novel, but in the tone of the film, poking like fun at Emma, poking fun at like those like gentry characters. I really wish they'd given more space to Mrs. Elton, because she is just such a vulgar character with like a backstory, like also like rooted in like colonialism that like I think it could have added more. But like I originally was like, oh, another adaptation of Emma. Like I'm going to watch this, but should I be excited? And then I watched it and I was like, I will never question them ever again until I see the film, because there's still like different like ways to tell these stories. Which alas, Persuasion, you gave me a bunny, which, you know, it was a cute bunny. It's fine.
So Corinne, round us out.
So the thing I will add for me, for it to be recognizable as a Regency romance or a Regency style romance, whether that is like an effective Jane Austen adaptation or Bridgerton, is there needs to be this strict set of societal rules. And they don't always have to follow the rules. Like sometimes the characters can sort of consciously break them, but there does have to be an awareness of them in how these different characters interact with each other and how they are able to move through the world. And like, for example, thinking about like some of the very like risque conversations between Daphne and the Duke before they got married in the first season of Bridgerton. Part of the reason they were risque is because they were breaking the rules. So it was within that structure that worked for me.
Excellent. I mean, it's funny throughout the entirety of this conversation, though. I know we talked a lot about the first season of Bridgerton. I just keep thinking about in the second season when Kate gets out of the carriage and then Anthony is like smelling her air as he walked by, and I'm like, that's yearning. If you're not sniffing after your lover, do you really want them? And I'm like, what does that say about me? But neither here nor there. I think this is probably a good place to kind of wrap up our conversation. This has been a really juicy one that's covered a lot of different areas and realms, from wrestling to yearning, as it were. But what we like to do kind of at the end of the show is give our guests a chance to let the world know where to find them. So, Mav, Hannah, where can we find y'all individually, but also beyond the links in our show notes, where can our listeners find Vox Pop?
Is it me?
You go first.
I wasn't sure.
You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, all of the places. At Vox Popcast, and then me, I'm at Chris Maverick and all those same places. We've got a show just about every week, pretty much every week, and I also do another show called Gosh Golly Wow, which is just about comics. It's not even just about comics. It's about one specific comic. It's about the comic book Excalibur that ran from 1988 till 1998, and like weird deconstructions of this sex farce comic book that Marvel Comics put out, starring Nightcrawler and Kitty Pryde and Phoenix and Captain Britain and Megan. It's a weird thing that we decided to do, but it's a show that I enjoy. And then you got Vox Pop every week. I guess you can enroll in one of my classes if you go to the University of Pittsburgh. That'd be fun. That's a good way to find me. And then I'm on the internet a lot. I just saying whatever random thing comes to my mind.
And Hannah, what about you?
So, to Mav's great frustration, I always say you can find me on Vox Podcast and pretty much nowhere else, which honestly probably sounds better on this show since it's not actually Vox Podcast. I don't think I'm that much of a Luddite, but I'm not really on the internet, but if you send comments about Bridgerton to Vox Podcast, I'll read them.
Well, that's true. She will read all of them specifically if you talk about Vox.
Yeah.
If you talk about Bridgerton or we have an annual Christmas episode when we talk about we have 5 hosts on Vox Podcast, and then every year we do this show about Christmas shows, particularly on Netflix and Lifetime and Hallmark, and no one shows up but me and Hannah. we have to bring guests every time because our other co-hosts will not do the show.
Most of the time, they're my literal family, like my brother-in-law, my sister, and Josh all show up, and that.
Oh,
that's
by the
how
way,
it is.
Christmas Inheritance is the show that we were talking about that has Eliza Taylor from the 100, a show that I also adored.
Yes. I'm so sorry that she was wasted in that horrible movie. It was truly the worst.
Oh, I've seen worse, but like it's probably the worst one in the Netflix cinematic Christmas universe, which is a thing.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yes,
we have so many thoughts.
Right, so circling back. And as always, you can find us at Sex Love Lit on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Ayani, what do we have coming up in the Sex Love Lit universe?
Oh, in the Sex Love Lit, that sounds, I think, kinkier than you need it to.
Isn't that why we named the show that?
What'd you say? Oh yeah,
Isn't that why we named the show that?
You're absolutely right. No, you're absolutely right. But we actually have a lot of very fun and exciting things coming up for you all post hiatus. Corinne and I have been rolling around a lot of different ideas of things that we want to talk about and do. One, we have some episodes we're going to be doing about Lore Olympus, which is very exciting. That's a big webtoon. Some of you probably read Lore Olympus. Corinne and I are going to be doing a presentation about that, a podcast style presentation, but also releasing an old, I guess, podcast style presentation we did about Lore Olympus last 2 years ago now at this point.
Yeah, for the Young Adult Studies Association.
Yes. We're also thinking about maybe doing something about some different webtoons, because Corinne has been really into webtoon recently and reading a whole bunch. Of course, we're going to talk more about K-drama. We've been thinking about doing something on Yumi Cells, which will be a La Petite, because we want to wait until the 3rd season of Yumi Cells drops to do a full episode. Because we're also deeply in love with Attorney Woo, we want to do maybe a La Petite about that show. I have an interview that I've been editing for a year and a half that I will finally finish and that we can release. I think you were going to get me to read Judy Blume's Forever, which I've never read, and have us have a conversation about that. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming up.
A lot of future media, maybe some blast from the past. Also, on a K-drama note, I am imminently going to cross the 100 K-dramas mark, so we may do an episode about that. But I think by the time this episode releases, I will be well past it. But
that's true. We did want to do like a celebration of your 100th like K-drama and do like a retrospective of your watching.
There's 100 different series, not 100 episodes, right? Because you said there's 52 hours.
100 different series.
Yeah, wow. That's impressive.
Yeah,
I don't know if I've watched. Yeah.
I mean, it helps for the majority of them are one season long. So like one and done. But anyway, yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Mav and Hannah. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yes, y'all are wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah,
thanks
absolutely.
For having us.
I enjoyed this. It's all of my favorite podcasts are hosted by friends of mine, because it's weird, because like I get to the point where I start going, like I'll listen to the show and then I have arguments with you guys and it's like, oh wait, they can't hear me because I'm not actually talking to them right now. So it's really nice when I actually am on the show. It's like, oh, that's better.
I don't do that. I just listen to the show and I'm like, oh yeah, that's really good. That's a really good point. I really like appreciate this conversation about love triangles. Yes, I've learned from this.
It's not arguing like bad. It's arguing like I have thoughts.
Yeah.
Then frequently, it's also nice when you're really friends with the host in real life, because it means you can just text people and be like, oh, so that thing you were talking about, which happens a lot.
Yeah.
But also, I guess this means that we'll have to bring y'all back at some point.
Anytime.
For another show, so you can hang out with us some more. But this has been Sex Love Literature. Thank you again so much, listeners, for waiting for us during our hiatus and being back now that we're back. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.